She thought I was making a joke on her, and then she realized, she's like, wait a minute, God was talking about himself. All right, we are in Romans chapter 4. Let me just grab this live sheet and send it out to everyone. Romans chapter 4. Let me just grab this live sheet and send it out to everyone.
Oh, we have 7 baby chickens.
6.
7.
Are we up to 7 now?
Yes.
Last I knew we had 6.
Well,
Yeah, so we had a chicken who was laying on eggs, and she had 13, and she crushed 2 of them. And so my wife said, okay, that's it. And we put them, she took them all, much to the ferociousness of the chicken, and put them in the incubator. Now, the other thing is, we had another hen who we didn't know that she was nesting. She had hidden her nest in this little shed where we put boxes and our lawnmowers and stuff. And Noah was out doing his chores and he heard this, and he started tracking on it. And she's behind this long cabinet and the wall that's the backside of the chicken coop. Little bitty space like this.
yeah.
Ended up having 5 babies in there.
Oh, wow.
And so we ended up, because it was such a narrow space, Noah was the only one that she would let touch her or the babies. So he picked her up and the babies and put them in a small coop that we normally put our babies in until they're mature. So we've got those 5. We've got how many we got in the house? 3?
We have 4 in the thing that we took from the other hand.
The black container.
Hand.
So we've got 4 that are a couple weeks old, and then we have these 6 or 7 that are in the incubator that had just hatched last night. So
we have 5. Oh, and there's tons of eggs.
So yeah, we
Chicken
are,
coops. So
as
they're
far as
like-
the chickens go, our cup overfloweth. So,
They're like, here, have a bunch of eggs. Oh, we just got some.
okay, so we are in Romans chapter 4.
Then I won't need the eggs.
Okay, we're starting. Good evening to you who are watching on YouTube. Glad you could join us. Appreciate it if you would say hello in the chat so we know that you're here. I'm just going to let Michelle know we are live on YouTube. She's tending the burn pit at home and will be watching with the phone. Oh, there she is. I just texted her and she messaged me back. So we're in Romans chapter 4. We left off verse 11. In this section we were going over last week is Abraham was justified by faith. And we got into that nice little side conversation about, do children have an inherent knowledge of right and wrong or not? And the Bible clearly tells us that it's something that has to be taught, which is a good discussion. But faith justified Abraham when he trusted God and was willing to sacrifice his own son. And Paul, the writer of Romans, goes back and forth in the book to addressing the Jews and addressing the Gentiles. And in this section, we see a lot of talk about being circumcised. We know that was a very crucial part to the Jewish heritage, the Israelite nation heritage. And he's here saying, it's not circumcision that justifies you, but it's your faith. So we'll round out this section here. We'll start in verse 12. Well, let me back up so we can get some context here. Start in verse 11. He received the sign of circumcision as a seal of the righteousness that he had by faith while he was still uncircumcised. The purpose was to make him the father of all who believed without being circumcised. Which means not only was he father to the Jews, but to all who are uncircumcised, being the Gentiles. So that righteousness would be counted to them as well, and to make him the father of the circumcised, who are not merely circumcised, but who also walk in the footsteps of the faith that our father Abraham had before he was circumcised. So the importance is walking in the footsteps of faith more than just having an outward physical work done. You know, faith is more important than, well, look at me, I'm holy because I followed this tenet and I don't eat this food and I was circumcised. I mean, all those are good, but where is it if you don't have a solid faith? And likewise, your faith should naturally produce good works. The promise realized through faith. Someone would read 13 through 15.
For the promise to Abraham or to his descendants that he would be heir of the world was not through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. For if those who are of the law are heirs, faith is made void and the promise is nullified. For the law brings about wrath, but where there is no law, neither is there violence.
So Paul is addressing the law. And it's interesting here that he says, for the promise to Abraham and his descendants or offspring that he would be heir of the world did not come through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. You know, he goes on to say, where there is no law, there is no transgression. We've discussed in previous Bible studies before that the law was given so it would show people their sin. So they would know, hey, when I do this, God is not happy. But over time, law became oppressive. Instead of being a guideline for people to live by and go, okay, this is my left and right limit, it was so convoluted by the religious leaders, the Pharisees and teachers of the law. And they said, the more we study into it, the more that this makes sense. And they added all these extra books and bylaws and everything else that became too much. It's almost like going into the Hall of Records in DC and actually looking at all the federal laws in the books. There's just so much that if everything was held to standard, every single one of us at some point in our life has broken the law and not known it. I'm just looking at how the NIV reads as opposed to the ESV. Sometimes I like to get a different perspective on translation. What translation are you reading out of?
New American Standard.
Okay, New American Standard. I think is what I was reading last week. Is that what's on the top?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, got it. I'll stick
Okay.
to just two. You know. Let's look at verse 14, break down 14 a little bit. For if it is the adherents of the law who are to be the heirs, faith is null and the promise is void. It's driving home the point that you're not saved by the law. You're saved by faith, by walking a godly life, by living in a way that's pleasing to God. The law isn't, this is not to say that the law isn't important, because the law is important, because it's there to show us where our limits, our left and right limits are, where our transgressions are. But like we said, it became so convoluted and so oppressive that it almost became impossible for the average person to. And we see here that it says, if adherents of the law, if it's those who adhere to the law who are going to be the heirs, then what good is faith? It's easy to look at something and go, okay, as long as I don't do this, I'm okay. We have a checklist and go, okay, I didn't take the Lord's name in vain. I honored my mother and father today. I didn't steal. I didn't covet my neighbor's wife. I didn't murder anyone today. Came close a couple times, but I didn't. So I have my checklist. Okay, so I don't have any other gods before God Almighty. Okay, no, don't do that. I haven't made myself an idol. Okay, so I'm good. You shall not misuse the Lord's name. No, didn't do that. Yep, I remember the Sabbath. I honored my mom and dad. I didn't murder. I didn't commit adultery. I didn't steal. I didn't give false testimony against my neighbor. I didn't covet my neighbor's house or his wife or his maid servant or his manservant or any of his belongings. Yeah, okay, I'm good for today. Everyone can take a checklist and go, okay, well, I didn't bring any of the 10 Commandments today, so if I die right now, I'm okay. Well, then what good is faith? God's not looking for, check the block. He looks at our hearts. He looks at the way we live our lives. He looks at the way we treat people. He looks at our sincerity. He looks at how we live life overall. I've heard it said before that this temporal plane of existence is our testing ground. And we either pass or fail. And I was like, well, that's kind of a very basic way of looking at it, but it's not wrong. So we want to make sure that we either hear, well done, my good and faithful servant, or depart from me, I don't know you. And Paul, writing to the Jewish Christians at this point, is saying, faith is more important than law. For the law brings wrath. And where there is no law, there is no transgression. I wrestle with verse 15 a little bit.
Well, if there wasn't a law, people wouldn't have known sin.
Right.
And so the law was there to let them know they're not perfect and God has a better way.
So the reason I wrestle with this is because then it brings up the question of, if you have someone who's never known the gospel, who's never been given even an Old Testament, never been seen the Torah, doesn't know anything about God, and they die, how does God deal with that? See, we have an understanding as Christ followers, as God's people, that there's a great judgment. We want to make sure that we do everything we can to be on the right side of judgment. There are people who go through this life. They may hear the name Jesus spoken and not give another thought about it. Oh, those religious nuts over there. But no one has ever dared share the gospel with them. Well, if they don't know, how are they judged? And that's why
I think God says they will know. One way or another, God's going to reveal to them.
But going back to the conversation we had last week, if someone was not taught a basic right or wrong, or you have people who are amoral, they have something chemically wrong in their brain, where they look at everything as I either do this or I do this, and to them either one is not wrong. And I know those are the rare cases, but that's kind of where my wheels spin at, and I go, now I want to know.
God's all knowing.
But God's all knowing.
Yeah, he'll take care of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have to decide.
Yeah,
Right. Thankfully, we don't have to make that decision.
that's right. He has given them a chance in their life to do what he wanted them to do, and he'll be the judge.
That sun was coming right out of that window, just at the right angle. Any thoughts on 13 through 15, besides what we discussed? All right, let's go on. You with me.
I didn't even know there was stuff going down. I just
You see without perceiving. Okay. For the law brings wrath, but where there's no law, there's no transgression. If we can get someone to read 16 through 16 and 17. Okay. That is why it depends on faith, in order that the promise may rest on grace and be guaranteed to all his offspring, not only to the adherent of the law, but also to the one who shares the faith of Abraham, who is father of us all. As it is written, I have made you the father of many nations. In the presence of God, in whom he believed, who gives life to the dead and calls into existence the things that do not exist. In hope he believed against hope that he should become the father of many nations, as he had been told, so shall your offspring be. This is why it depends on faith, in order that the promise may rest on grace and be guaranteed to all his offspring. So what is the grace that the promise rests on?
Well, we certainly have grace, and Christ brought grace,
Mm-hmm.
and he ushered in faith. This is the way you're to be saved, it's through faith. And then I know that you won't make it perfectly, so I offer grace.
Well, and we also see evidence of God's grace all throughout the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
You know, look how many times that
You want to sit in a nice soft chair?
Anybody?
just you. Good evening, Bob. We see all throughout the Old Testament God's grace on his people. You know, I tend to look at the Bible through the eyes of a father. You know, no matter how many times my kids do something wrong, and I may scold them, and I may discipline them, but it's never to the point where I said, I'm done with you. I've had my moments where I'm like, I don't like you right now. I don't want to look at you, but just know I still love you. You know, we were cleaning up the yard today, and we found an irrigation pipe for watering the big fields that was made out of PVC pipe that was busted all to pieces. And needless to say, Michelle was much more upset than I was because she had spent the last week in the yard. She spent 9 hours cleaning up the whole yard, putting things in piles, making it neat. Well, our two boys, while they were out, both of them had got something got a burr underneath their skin. And instead of taking their frustrations out on the prescribed things like boxes, a broken chair that Noah has out there, they decided, well, let's walk around the yard and see what we can find. And they found one of these watering pipes that does not belong to us, it belongs to the homeowner that we now have to replace. And so we're out there cleaning up the yard, and we find this busted up pipe. Michelle's, so we call Noah outside. You want to tell us about this? Oh, Chad and I broke that. Well, we were angry and this and that. So I called Chad. I thought Noah would have told you about the pipe. I'm like, oh, you've already talked to Mom. Well, no. And I didn't say anything in my message about the pipe. Why are you calling me about the pipe? Well, because Mom texted me. So you talked to your mom about it. Well, no, she just texted me and I told you. Semantics. You had communication with your mom. You know what I want to talk to you about. And even though I was frustrated with both of my boys, and they're going to work to pay it off, there is still that grace and love because they're my kids. And even though the oldest frustrates me a little bit more than the youngest most times, there's still that love and grace. And I tell them, I may not always like you, but I always love you. And that's true. There are times where I just don't like my kids because I'm frustrated with their behavior. They get water out of the fridge for me. And that's kind of how I view the grace of God when I read through, especially in the Old Testament. I look at the nation of Israel on a much like how a child grows. When they're younger, you have to have a firmer hand with them. Let them know what, don't do this, do this. This is good, this is bad. And as they mature and they grow, you don't have to have such a heavy hand on them so much. You hope. This is true. Although
There's a house stubborn there.
there are times when my oldest, I want to lay hands upon him mightily, but no. But yeah, and that's kind of how I view how God deals with Israel on their growth journey. But coming back to Abraham, so Abraham had Isaac when he was well off in years, and God told him, "Hey, you know what? You're well off in years, but you're going to be the father of nations, plural." Oh, thanks.
Is there anyone else want me?
It's 7:00. We're on a medication time to help keep that swelling down. That's what the alarm was. Just take 1.5. Here you go, young lady. So the grace. Bob, we're in 4 and 16. Sorry, our Bob's going to sit here. He's like, I know we're in Romans. I just don't know where he's at. That is why it depends on faith, in order that the promise may rest on grace and be guaranteed to all his offspring. So the grace is the guarantee. We know, because of the grace of God, the love of God, that what he promised is a guarantee. Not only to the adherent of the law, but also to the ones who shares the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. Abraham had some incredible faith. If I was well along in years and God said, okay, you get one son, and I'm going to make you the father of nations. Through your son, multiple nations will arise.
Yeah, he wavered a little bit.
He did waver a little bit. He did.
Well, look how strong he was, though, with taking his son from him.
And that's
but
what I was talking about.
He had the other son before this one.
Yep, Ishmael.
So,
To Hagar. Although he wasn't the only one that waved.
this is true.
But if I had a son who I was told, through here, my people will spring up. And then God said, I want him. Sacrifice him to me. Can we have a talk about this? But we don't see that in Abraham. Abraham was like, okay. Because he knew that even if he had to go through that sacrifice, he had faith that God would keep his promise. To have such a faith, I wish I had that kind of faith. But if God sent a messenger and said, okay, I want you to sacrifice Lydia to me. And we waited for Lydia for 4 years. And she is one of our 4 miracle children. But it was a lesson for me in waiting. Michelle never gave up hope. After one incident that happened, I said, okay, this is God telling us, be happy with the dynamic our family is, and let's just leave it alone. I don't even want to know. I have an idea, but I don't want to know. But we don't see that with Abraham, you know, because he was told through Isaac, these people are going to scream. And God said, sacrifice them. And when we see the conversation, as Abraham and Isaac go up the mountain, Isaac's like, we have everything but the sacrifice. And Abraham said, God will provide. Because he probably wanted to wait till he got up there. He figured he could still run halfway down the mountain. You are the sacrifice, son. But he waited till he got up there. And it said, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you're what God's provided. And we see that God did provide before he brought the knife down on Isaac. But to be able to, I can't comprehend. As a dad, I can't comprehend. That's why when I think about the death of Christ, it is so hard to fathom that God loved us that much. And to make it more personal, we can think of it, God loved me that much that he was willing to say, I'm going to give you my son, I'm going to let him live on the earth, and I'm going to let him die a very horrible, almost unimaginable death because I love you. Like, I can't take it. It's almost too much because I know that God is all powerful. There's nothing beneath his power. He's omnipresent. He lives outside of time. He knew what he was doing. But from a father's perspective, look, I love y'all. I would not sacrifice any of my children for you. I don't have that kind of faith. I don't have that kind of love for other people.
Well, when you look at in the Old Testament, the Israelites were always murmuring or doing something they shouldn't be doing. And when they repented, God would always take them back. And it just
Happened repeatedly.
Well, you know, my oldest boy called me today and he goes, hey, how much is that pipe that you know busted up? I said, I don't know. I'm busy working all day. I haven't had a chance to price it. He's like, well, I don't know if I'll be able to pay it all back, but I can at least pay something. Let me know how much. And it's his way of saying, hey, you know what? I made a bonehead move. I'm sorry. And he did say he was sorry. He apologized. And he's like, I just was mad and I thought it was trash because it was near the trash pile. I'm like, it's hanging on a fence. But that's not the point. But, you know, I didn't stay mad at him. I didn't say, you know, you costed me all this money and how could you do this? I don't want to talk to you. No, it's just, okay, you know, I forgive you. We all make mistakes. Next time you come out here, please respect the property because most of it's not ours. So that grace guarantees is the promise. That is why it depends on faith in order that the promise may rest on grace and be guaranteed to all his offspring, not only to the adherent of the law, but also the ones who share the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. Verse 17, as it is written, I have made you the father of many nations. Again, a fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham. In the presence of the God in whom we believe, who gives life to the dead and calls into existence the things that do not exist. Calls into existence the things that do not exist.
Does that maybe sound like creation?
Mm-hmm. Well, because nothing existed before God created it. In hope, he believed against hope that he should become the father of many nations. As he had been told, so shall your offspring be. He did not weaken in faith.
So she would have been 9 years older than her.
Yep. So Abraham was 9 years older
Yeah.
than grandma.
And the amazing thing is, he didn't say, now?
Right? I think if God came to me and told me at 99, I'm going to give you another child. No thanks. But if it wasn't for Abraham, nothing else would have been fulfilled. And I was like looking back through the genealogy and just seeing how God put people in place, fulfilled promises to bring about the physical, earthly body, the incarnate Christ. He did not weaken in faith when he considered his own body, which was as good as dead, since he was about 100 years old, but when he considered the barrenness of Sarah's womb. No unbelief made him waver concerning the promise of God, but he grew strong in his faith as he gave glory to God, fully convinced that God was able to do what he had promised. That is why his faith was counted to him as righteousness. But the words, "it was counted to him," were not written for his sake alone, but for ours also. It will be counted to us who believe in him, who raised from the dead Jesus our Lord, who was delivered up for our trespasses and raised for our justification. So our faith needs to be that of Abraham. That when God says, this is what I'm going to do, we need to have enough faith to realize that regardless of how hopeless the circumstance looks, God's able to do it. I have found in my own self as I have gotten along in life and as I've experienced things, there have been times when my faith has wavered because I don't see, okay, how is God going to do this? You know, I mentioned before that it took me and Michelle 4 years before we were able to conceive with Lydia. Michelle had a bunch of health problems. I was facing some things of my own that I was dealing with. I had self-doubt. Michelle knew without a shadow of a doubt. In fact, when we were dating, she actually had what I believe was a prophetic dream that we got married and had a baby girl. And guess what? We got married, we had a baby girl. Not right away, but 4 years. And she knew something within that dream. This is going to happen. She never stopped praying. She never gave up hope. She took it as one of God's promises. Me, on the other hand, we had one time where we were sure we conceived, went in for ultrasound, and there was nothing there. That broke me. And that's when I said, I'm done. God, this is God telling us, be content with the way your family is, because we're a blended family. And that's the mindset I got. Okay, message received. I'm just going to be happy. And Michelle, she held fast. She didn't waver. She kept praying. Every night she would pray. And she continued to pray. And then after we conceived with Lydia, it was really funny because Noah and Brianna were not full term. They were both early. Brianna way more than Noah. So when Michelle got into her third term, the final term of labor, she was experiencing some things and she thought something was wrong. And I'm like, oh no, I've been through this. That's normal. Well, then she didn't believe me, so she called my mom. Yeah, I'm going through this. Nope, Josh is right. This is normal. And it was like a whole new experience for her. And it was so funny. I did the typical loving husband thing. I laughed at her. And then I loved on her. It's okay, it'll be fine. But looking at that situation, and then as we're reading this, I go, my faith should have been stronger. I should have trusted that God had this in store for us. But I let everything else that I thought that I knew get in the way of my faith. well, I'm dealing with this. Michelle's dealing with this medical condition. Um, our life is too hectic for a baby. You know, there's no way this is ever going to happen. And it happened, right? Because my wife had to take my baby.
I had a neighbor she had 9 miscarriages before she had her first child.
Mm.
Then they had 4 kids, but 9. You'd think a person would give up,
Michelle has a friend. I don't think she had that many, but she had quite a number of them. And Michelle was right there with her every single one. But eventually, because she had 4 kids already, and eventually she had a daughter. And full term, healthy, cares about you, honoring, just like Miss Lydia. I swear, the day Lydia turned 4, she woke up on her 4th birthday honoring. You know, when we get in situations in life and we go, I don't see how God is going to get us through. I don't see how God is going to make this work. We have to remember that He's not bound by time, circumstance, this plane of existence that we live in. He created it all. He's outside of it. He's in it, but He's not confined by it like we are. And I have to remind myself there's nothing beyond God's power, regardless of how hopeless it seems. You know, I've had some very interesting conversations with God as of late. I'm still struggling with losing my friends. And a lot of my questions have been why? Why both of them? I don't understand. And I don't. And Michelle and I have talked about this, and we've come to understand that we're not going to know this side of eternity. You know, we know what took Derek. We're still waiting on to find out what happened with Terry. But even knowing that won't explain why both of them went within mere minutes of each other. Now, if it was a car accident, if it was a robbery, not bad, you know, it was something like that. Okay, I can comprehend it. But this was purely medical stuff.
But then, when Mom told me to that Terry passed away too.
Mhm.
I was really sweet.
Yeah.
In
I mean,
my mind, I'm like, that's sweet.
well, and she was a few years less than 50, and then Derek was only 44. Yeah, and you know, we had some good cries, and we've had some talks about I don't understand because Derek and Carrie, as far as friends go, were our soulmates. You know, you generally hear soulmates referred to in romantic relationships, but they were such a match for us in friendship. There's been like no other friendship I've ever experienced in this life. I have another good friend I've known for 27 years, but in a lot of ways, Derek and I were a lot closer than me and my friend Chad, who Chad is named after. You know, and it's because we had the same mindset. We went through the same experiences. And him and I talked a lot about God, about Christ. You know, the last time I seen him, we went to services together at the Clayfield Church of Christ in Clayfield, Utah. And, you know, Carrie used to talk to Michelle. We never had any disagreements. We never had any arguments. We never had any unnecessary drama with these people. And we're sitting there thinking back on our friendship and we're going, they truly were God's blessing to us in the way of friendship. I have no other friends like them ever in my 40 years on this earth. And even though I'm sad that they're gone and I don't understand it, I think back to God blessed me with 12 years with my friend Eric. But over the last week, I have felt like my faith at certain times has wavered because I don't have that line. But then as we read through Romans, I realize I don't have to have the line. And I'm not going to know until I get to the other side of eternity. And I have to learn to be okay with it. I see you shaking your head. That's how I feel. And I'm like, I don't like it, but I have to be okay with
Yeah,
it
and
because,
I think that Sarah and I both can relate with losing kids.
And I lost my son.
And there's no,
You ask why, but we'll know someday.
yeah,
I have good suspicion.
well, and that's like, I mean, my daughter-in-law, she just still can't come to grips with it. I told her one time, I said, you have to remember the devil's at work too. And some people turn away from their faith because of
Yeah.
things that have happened.
Mhm.
And you can't let that happen.
and that's the other thing is you have to recognize those things and those in the midst of your sorrow, we still have to keep up our shield of faith. And we still have to, because when you're sad and you're mourning and you are just downtrodden, that is the perfect time for the enemy to attack. That's why, in the army, they teach you on the battlefield. If it's your best friend, guess what? You focus on what has to get done in that moment, because if you stop to mourn your friend, you're as good as dead on the battlefield. And our spiritual life is a battlefield. And so, I had myself a good cry while we were there just a couple of days ago. I went down into what used to be his recording studio, and I just shut the door because that was his sanctuary. When we were on phone calls, that was just supposed to be the two of us because we needed to ground one another. That's where he went. When we were talking about stuff and it needed to be away from prying ears, that's where we went. That was his sanctuary. And I walked around his house, most of the furniture was out and gone and everything. The studio and all of his soundproofing has been ripped off and things. And it's just up there and there. And I was just processing all this stuff. And I sat down and I started typing out what I was feeling on Facebook. I had to have an outlet. And I just started crying so much I couldn't even see the screen. And I was so much caught up in that moment. I did not perceive my wife or Carrie's niece in the room. Now, I'm a hypervigilant person. I normally hear people coming down the stairs. I normally hear a door opening, and it catches my attention. I was so caught up in the sorrow that I didn't even realize they walked into the room until I think it was Samantha, Carrie's niece, said, "Are you okay?" And Michelle touched my shoulder. And I was like, "There's people here." But then I felt bad because I've been trying to be strong for Michelle. And this is my nature. And before I went in the army, when my grandfather passed away in 99, I put all my emotions in a box, put it on a shelf. And I waited till I thought the rest of the family is strong enough to handle their stuff. It was 3 months before I tried for my grandfather. And so I was trying to do that for Michelle because how close her and Carrie were. Plus I'm a big strong man. I have a big pillow, And I was trying to be that pillar of strength. But in that, I have found that crying, being honest with my emotions, connects us in a shared bond and is in itself a form of strength. But in that, I have to remember that I can't let my guard down. I have to maintain my faith. And, we were having some very poignant conversations on the way home about, why? And why would God do this? And I look back on it now as it was the enemy taking scripture out of context. I started thinking about Job. And we started talking about Job, and I'm like, God let him do it. God let him take out his family and everything, cover himself from head to toe with boils and sores. But the moral of that is, through all of that, Job never lost his faith.
And God blessed him with double.
And God bless them with that.
Those of us that have all lost kids, so we have opportunity in our lives to comfort others. We've gone through it and we know how it is, so we can comfort other people. So that's one thing that we can do. When you lose somebody, you can know how they're feeling and help them through it.
You can empathize with them, sympathize with them. You know, that's why,
Doesn't make it any easier.
no, but sometimes having that shared experience will open the door so you can share, hey, this is why you're my strength. This is my faith is a part of who I am. You know, I had, I'm part of this group on Facebook. It's a Christian prepping group. And so, you know, a lot of us, they say everyone else on here, you know, identifies himself as a Christian. But that tends to be a very broad term. And they said, so how do you define yourself as a Christian? And I thought, what an interesting question. And I read through some of the other different answers and I put on there and I said, I define it as this for me. I do my best every day to follow the path that God has set out. And my relationship with the Father and with the Son is how, is where I find my worth. You know, because I think about a lot of people find their self-worth in what they do, or in their kids, in their job, in the house they live in, the cars they drive. I'm like, you know, I want my self-worth to be my faith, my relationship with other people. You know, and I get those chances to share that with others. Just before we went to Salt Lake, I think it was Saturday, I was on the way to, into Stevensville for something. I don't remember. And there was this guy, right? And there was a motorcycle pulled off on the side of the road right there on the East Side Highway, right by the ammunition factory. And there's this guy in leathers walking. And I'm like, oh, his bike broke down. So I pull over on the side. I'm like, hey, you didn't ride? He's like, yeah, I need to get to the gas station. My bike ran out of gas. Hop on in. So we go to the gas station and we're talking. And I took that as an opportunity. You know, I live here. I've lived here about a year and a half. I attend the Church of Christ behind the Frontier Cafe. And you should come be my guest one of these Sundays. It's a small congregation. You don't have to get all gussy up. You just come as you are. And he started sharing with me that he was going through he'd been through some life struggles. He's a recovering addict and everything. And he said, "Yeah," he says, "I may come in a couple weeks, maybe a month." He says, he says, "It's been a long time since I've been here." So I said, "We're there every Sunday." I said, "Bible studies on Wednesday nights." There was just that opportunity to plant a seed. His name was Mark. I only remember that because I associated that with my neighbor in Great Falls. He used to live next to me. If I can't associate people's names, I can remember.
Yeah.
But Paul is writing to the Jewish Christians and emphasizing the importance of faith over law. It's our faith and God's grace that sustains us through everything. It's not the law. It's not a check the block kind of thing. Thoughts? You're awfully quiet lately, Bob.
I'm tired. I'm tired.
You get your workout on today? Those young kids put you through your paces?
Just when it's so. Yeah, last night's tournament lasted till 9. We got back home at 11.
Oh, you keep my hours.
Huh?
See, you're keeping mine and Michelle's hours. We got home from Salt Lake about 11:30. We're in bed by 12:30-ish. I think it was 1 o'clock the last time I looked at my clock on my phone. Well, next week we'll get into Romans chapter 5. Peace with God through faith, which we kind of already touched on that tonight. And really, the more we get through Romans, the more I get excited because my favorite chapter is 12. 12 is relatively a small chapter, but there's so much that's in there. And it's just this compact of, it's all 21 verses. And I mean, just even the first 3 verses, there's so much there that every Christ follower needs to live. But we'll get there in the weeks to come. As always, thank you all for your attendance. Thank you for tuning in on YouTube. If you always have any questions, feel free to email them. Put them in the comments section below. If you get the chance, come visit us on Sunday mornings. The class starts at 10. Services are at 11. As always, the Bible studies, when I'm able to be here, is Wednesdays from 6:30 to 7:30 Mountain Standard Time. Hope you all are able to join us next week. God bless.
Do that too, Sal.
Okay.
We already got one.
Oh, you did.